That's why if we could see all 9 consoles and we could take away the cell by using the Xbox 360 architecture.
So if y'all haven't seen Truth's video, the link to it will be down below in the description. But basically, it's 11 minutes of not a single rebuttal. Now, his main thing, and pretty much his only point he tried to make to try to invalidate my chart, was that I have to compare it to the 360 instead of the PS3 because the cell architecture, things are hard to compare. So here you go, Truth. Here is a chart comparing the 360 to the PS4's leap. And what do you notice? It's the same fucking thing. And I find it funny how you tell me I have to compare the 360, but then you go into the comment section on your video and tell me that the PS3 and 360 are two very closely spec'd machines. So what's the point of me even adding the 360 to this graph in the first place then? You see what I'm saying? But just to point out, this is a little bit more refined graph. I actually got the combined flops performance of the PS3 and the 360 to compare it to the combined flops performance of the PS4. It's no longer CPU only. So those are the multipliers you get right there. The green arrows, all that means is that they're greater than in that area. And the minuses you'll see next to some of the multipliers near the bottom is basically, you know, that's it at its max. It's 7 times maximum, 7 or below, 15 or below. You see what I mean? So even those aspects, you know, with those things, smaller than the previous leaps. But that's all I have to say. The rest of the video, I'm just going to roll his footage, show him contradicting himself, and show him arguing against Mark Cerny. This is the smallest leap we've ever had. You can't use games. You're not using games. You told me to use numbers. I use numbers. Then you tell me I can't use numbers. So now I have to use the 360. I use the 360. So what's going to be your excuse now? It is what it is. Face the facts.
There's great difference between last gen and this current gen by using PS3 and by using these inflated numbers with the cell architecture, which weren't the actual real life numbers when it came to gaming. Inflated numbers, inflated numbers, inflated numbers, inflated numbers, inflated numbers, right? The other problem is he wants to use numbers of consoles that have gone through their entire generation and have been made more efficient over the course of that generation, that have had more juice sucked out of them over the course of that generation compared to consoles that are about to launch. Shokio is trying to give me numbers on the PlayStation 4. Part of my point of asking for these numbers, because I can't find them myself, he's got a bunch of fucking question marks in his fucking chart. A bunch of fucking question marks in his fucking chart. Part of my point of asking for these numbers, because I can't find them myself, 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 numbers that are guesstimates of what's going to happen with the PlayStation 4. Just like he wants to ignore development time and time of release of these Killzone games, right? You guys already heard me say it in a video. Killzone 1 was released 5 years, we're talking release dates, 5 years before Killzone 2 was, right? And then we've got Killzone 3, which is 2 years before the next Shadowfall, Killzone 4, or whatever you want to call it. They were talking about a different gap. Oh, right. But they had the cell architecture to deal with on Killzone 2. It was harder architecture, it would take longer. But that was after the game came out 2 years after launch, right? So they had all those other games that were being made at launch, helping people learn how the cell architecture worked. They got to take advantage of some of that knowledge and put it into what they were doing with Killzone 2. How do we have that with Killzone 4? The game came out 2 years after launch, right? How do we have that with Killzone 4?
A platform by game creators, for game creators. It is a powerful and accessible system, CPU, we chose the most familiar architecture on the planet, the x86, allowing us to tap into over 3 decades of programming expertise.
The game came out 2 years after launch, right? How do we have that with Killzone 4?
The x86, allowing us to tap into over 3 decades of programming expertise. Over 3 decades. The
game came out 2 years after launch, right?
Over 3 decades.
How do we have that with Killzone 4?
For the graphics processor, we decided to use a highly enhanced PC GPU, something that would be easy to develop for in the early days of the platform lifecycle.
How do we have that with Killzone 4?
Easy to develop for in the early days of the platform lifecycle.
Right? You want to talk about how, well, they said they've been under game development on Killzone 4 Shadowfall for 3 years or whatever. Okay, that's still half the time of Killzone 1 to Killzone 2. And we're talking about a launch game.
Early days of the platform lifecycle.
And this is another problem with a lot of you PCites or you Wii U fanboys trying to, claim stuff. You guys act like because they're using the x86 architecture on PlayStation 4 because it's so much more so much more easy to develop for when compared to the Cell, which was hard as fuck, right? Oh, right. But they had the Cell architecture to deal with on Killzone 2 when compared to the Cell, which was hard as fuck. Oh, right. But they had the Cell architecture to deal with on Killzone 2. You want to act like any old developer, no matter how low their talent level is, could get a dev kit for the PlayStation 4 and bam, 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 show us the greatest graphics that the PlayStation 4 is ever going to have. Right? They're going to right off the gate going to use everything the PlayStation 4 can do on a launch title, and we're never going to see any improvement over the course of the generation.
We still can't even get 1080p 60 frames per second standard. Now, yes, we will, most likely get that in the future. That will become a standard. But the fact that they're not doing this at launch tells you something about their power.
As if any console maker ever has put out a console that hasn't improved over time throughout the generation. Right? When they say it's easy to develop for, they're comparing it to the Cell architecture.
So here you can see the impact that the straightforward and familiar architecture of PlayStation 4 has had on time to trial. It's basically back to where it was on PlayStation 1.
They're comparing it to the Cell architecture.
It's basically back to where it was on PlayStation 1.
Keep it at launch. Let's make sure to keep it at November, December. Don't worry about February. Because if a game came out in February that just killed everything, that doesn't mean anything because it wasn't at launch.
By that, he meant anyone should be able to put a quarter in an arcade machine and have fun playing immediately. But that there needed to be enough depth to the game that it would take several months for the players to fully develop their skills and to master. My variation on this was that the console should have a familiar architecture and be easy to develop games for in the early years of the console lifecycle. To our new way of thinking, the straightforward approach on the left is definitely advantageous. It gives you excellent day one performance, that we didn't want the hardware to be a puzzle that programmers would need to solve in order to make quality titles. The final piece of feedback we received was that they didn't want exotic, or a specific timeline to that. Perhaps some solid features for year one. Day one performance.
Exposed.